There was a time when control was mistaken for strength, when men were taught that leadership meant domination, that to lead, you had to command, that to be respected, you had to instill fear, that to be followed, you had to demand obedience. But that time has died, and thank God it has, because the world no longer needs men who lead by force. It no longer needs kings of control. It no longer needs tyrants cloaked in charm. The world now demands something rarer, something infinitely more dangerous. The man who leads without needing to control. He does not control because he does not need to. Because the fire inside him burns cleaner than ego. Because the power that fuels him is not sourced from insecurity, but from integration. He is a man who knows that leadership is not possession. It is not micromanagement. It is not surveillance. It is not puppeteering. It is presence. A presence that aligns instead of forces, that inspires instead of demands. That becomes the very thing others crave to follow, not because they must, but because they can't look away. This man does not seek control because he has already conquered the hardest territory known to mankind. Himself. He has walked through the wastelands of his own psyche, faced the fractured mirrors of his childhood, bled truth over every lie he once called identity. And in that bleeding, in that brutal shedding of illusion, he found something control could never offer: clarity. Clarity that leadership is not about controlling the outcome, it's about becoming the signal. You see, most men confuse control with influence. But influence is not born in tactics, it's born in being. A man who truly leads doesn't push, he doesn't pull, he radiates. His vision doesn't dominate, it elevates. His words don't manipulate, they reveal. His mission doesn't enslave, it awakens. Because he doesn't need to convince you. He just is what he says. And that embodiment breaks resistance faster than any force ever could. Control belongs to the weak, to the untested, to the boy pretending to be king, to the man who has never learned the sacred art of surrender, not to passivity, but to trust. To trust in the strength of alignment, in the authority of stillness, in the pull of purpose. The modern man leads not from his mouth, but from his spine. And it shows. He listens more than he speaks, because he knows that true direction is not found in domination, but in discernment. He sees before he acts, because impulse is the currency of the reactive. And he's not reactive, he's responsive, controlled, not controlling. He's not loud, but the gravity of his presence bends the entire room. He doesn't seek to be liked, he seeks to be true. And in a world addicted to performance, that truth feels like thunder. It shakes foundations. It rearranges expectations. It exposes every false leader trying to control what he hasn't yet mastered within himself. This is what Jung knew, that a man must make the unconscious conscious, or he will be ruled by it. And he will call that rule leadership. He will call his shadow vision. He will call his wounds wisdom. But the modern man knows better. He knows that until you lead yourself through the chaos, through the craving, through the compulsion, you are just another echo, just another voice in the fog, just another mask pretending to guide while secretly lost. And so he goes inward, not to retreat, but to reclaim. He dismantles his need to be feared. He releases his need to be worshipped. He burns his desire to be followed, so that what remains is something far more magnetic: authenticity. Authenticity that leads by example, not by command, that leads by energy, not by ego. And here's the paradox. The moment he stops trying to control, the world starts to follow. Because we are not drawn to force. We are drawn to frequency. And his frequency is different. It's not manic, not grasping, not desperate for direction. It's anchored. It moves like a tide knot, sudden, not sharp, but unstoppable. It doesn't crash, it carves. And everything around it begins to shift. Because when a man no longer needs to control, he becomes the kind of leader people choose to follow, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. Recognition of something rare, something whole, something that doesn't fracture under pressure. He becomes a mirror, a quiet fire, a gravitational pull toward truth. And make no mistake, this doesn't mean he's passive. This doesn't mean he's soft. This doesn't mean he tolerates chaos or stands idle in the face of injustice. No, his boundaries are sharper than a blade. His vision is uncompromising. His standards do not bend. But he doesn't force them. He embodies them. And that embodiment does more than any lecture ever could. It becomes a living transmission, an unspoken command that says, rise, not because I said so, but because I am so. He doesn't raise his voice, because his presence already speaks louder. He doesn't micromanage because he surrounds himself with people awakened by his clarity. He doesn't cling to titles, to thrones, to systems of control because his power is not rooted in position, it's rooted in principle. And while the old world built leaders by hierarchy and obedience, the modern man builds influence through inner congruence. He leads without control because he leads from vision, not the kind painted for applause, but the kind etched into his bones. He doesn't lead because he wants to be followed. He leads because the vision demands it. He wakes up not to maintain control, but to serve the mission, to steward the fire, to carry the weight with grace, to walk first through the unknown, not to prove his worth, but because the calling won't let him rest. And when you see him, you feel it. You feel the difference between control and leadership, between manipulation and magnetism, between coercion and conviction. He does not dominate you. He invites you. He invites you to remember who you are beneath the fear. He invites you to awaken the leader inside of yourself, not through obedience, but through ownership, because the modern man does not breed followers. He ignites leaders. And when you ignite leaders, you don't create dependence, you create movement. You create legacy. You create a ripple that moves not because it was pushed, but because it was activated. That's what he does. Not through control, but through presence, through truth, through the refusal to lead from anything less than his deepest, most integrated self. He doesn't lead because he wants to be above you. He leads because he knows how to stand beside you with fire in his eyes and a storm in his chest that says, I've been through hell to find this path, and I won't drag you, I won't push you, but I'll walk it with or without you. And just like that, you begin to walk too, not because he forced you, but because something in you remembered. You were born to lead as well. And in that moment of remembrance, something ancient stirs in your bones. A fire you thought had long gone cold flickers back to life, not from pressure, not from demand, but from invitation. Invitation to step out of imitation and into initiation. Because the modern man does not govern by hierarchy, activates by example. He doesn't say, follow me because I have the answers. He says, stand with me because you carry answers of your own. He understands that the era of rulers is over. This is the age of risers. And risers don't need permission. They need exposure. Exposure to what is possible when a man stops clutching for control and starts cultivating coherence, the sacred alignment between word, action, and intention. He knows that in a world obsessed with domination, the ultimate rebellion is integrity. Because when you live from that place pure, anchored, undivided, everything begins to reorganize around you. People feel safer, not because you're soft, but because you're solid. People feel empowered, not because you give them power, but because your presence reminds them they already have it. People feel seen, not because you cater to them, but because you see them from a place of stillness rather than strategy. This is the quiet revolution, the inner uprising, the new paradigm of power. The man who leads without control is not void of structure. He is structure. His word is law because he lives it first. His world bends toward order because he brings inner order into every space he enters. He doesn't demand discipline. He is discipline. He doesn't project dominance. He radiates sovereignty. And that sovereignty cannot be challenged. Not because it crushes opposition, but because it contains it. Because a man who has mastered himself no longer fears resistance. He holds it, examines it, learns from it. And then he responds not from ego, but from essence. This is what makes him dangerous. Not because he controls others, but because he cannot be controlled. Not by temptation, not by flattery, not by fear, not by chaos. He is internally governed, rooted in his vision, guided by truth, immune to manipulation. And when you stand in front of that, when you feel the depth of a man who needs nothing from you, yet still serves you with everything in him, it disarms every part of you, still pretending. Every performance falls away. Every mask cracks. Every excuse dissolves. Because you're no longer being led by someone who wants your compliance. You're being called forward by someone who embodies your possibility. And suddenly, you don't want to follow. You want to rise. You want to lead. Not others. Not systems. Yourself. Because the greatest leaders don't create followers. They awaken forces. And the modern man-rooted, resolute sovereign is that force. He is that force, not because he shouts the loudest, not because he controls the most resources, and not because he bends people to his will, but because he masters the terrain within. And that mastery radiates. It ripples through the way he listens, not just to words, but to silence. It moves through the way he walks, not hurried, not hesitant, but grounded, as if every step knows where it's going, even if the path ahead isn't lit yet. It echoes in his decisions, swift when needed, patient when it counts, but always forged in fire-tested clarity. He doesn't confuse urgency with power. He doesn't mistake noise for leadership. He doesn't equate authority with force. He is the authority because he no longer abandons himself to earn approval. That's the difference. Most men chase control to compensate for the lack of control within. They rule with fear because they're terrified of being seen. They dominate because they've never been held. They micromanage because they've never trusted themselves to let go. But the modern Mantha, one who leads without needing to control, has made peace with the unknown. He doesn't fear uncertainty. He flows with it. He doesn't grip outcomes, he guides them. He doesn't trap others in his own limitations. He liberates them with his presence. And this is what makes him unforgettable. You don't remember what he said. You remember what he stirred. Not just thoughts, but the sacred disruption that happens when you come face to face with a man who no longer lives in reaction to the world, but in revelation of his role within it. This kind of man doesn't come from trends. He comes from transformation, from the dark nights no one saw, from the deaths he endured that no one applauded, from the brutal discipline of unlearning everything false that once looked like strength. He leads without needing to control because he doesn't lead from fear. He leads from freedom. And when you lead from freedom, your life stops being a performance. It becomes a pillar, a beacon for others still tangled in the illusion that they need to push, persuade, or prove. But you become the proof that they don't. You become the evidence that power is not something to be taken. It's something to be embodied quietly, consistently, unshakably. You don't lead by gripping tighter. You lead by becoming clearer, clear in who you are, clear in what you serve, clear in what you will not tolerate T not because of anger, but because of alignment. And the world begins to follow not because you controlled it, but because you showed it another way. And that is the rarest leadership of all. Not domination, not manipulation, but revelation. The revelation of a man who no longer needs to control because he's already taken full command of the only kingdom that ever truly mattered, himself. And when a man takes command of himself, the world changes not because he forces it to, but because it cannot help but respond. It responds to his calm in chaos. It responds to his grace in conflict. It responds to his refusal to flinch when others would crumble, because he doesn't rise and fall with every wave. He is the tide, steady, relentless, ancient. He doesn't need to intimidate you into submission. His life inspires your evolution. He doesn't need a throne to feel powerful. His posture is the throne. His breath is the crown. And when he speaks, if he speaks it, is not to impress. It is not to command. It is to cut through. He cuts through illusion. He cuts through denial. He cuts through the noise of a world addicted to control and reminds you without saying it that the real path is quieter, harder, and infinitely more sacred. He's a modern man. He leads without control because he has died to the part of him that once needed it. He's buried the tyrant within, the overcompensator, the fragile boy masquerading as a leader. And from those ashes, something stronger rose. Not stronger in might, stronger in meaning, because that's the secret. Control is easy. Leadership without it, that's rare. That's real. That's legacy. You don't remember the men who controlled you. You remember the ones who showed you who you were when you forgot. You remember the ones who didn't try to dominate you but saw you. The ones whose presence called something higher out of you. The ones who didn't force but forged. The ones who stood so rooted, so clear, so deeply committed to something beyond themselves that you felt your own soul rise just by being near them. That's the modern man. He doesn't need to control because he knows who he is. He knows what he serves. And when you know that, you become undeniable. Not in your volume, not in your reach, not in your brand, but in your being. The world will test that. It will try to pull you back into noise. It will tempt you with shortcuts, accolades, the illusion of power, but you will not bite because you've tasted something deeper. You've felt the fire of alignment. You've walked the edge of stillness. You've led without control and watched how everything begins to orbit a man who doesn't need the world, but serves it anyway. And in that service, in that surrender to something greater than pride, you will find what all the controllers never will. Freedom, respect that cannot be bought, influence that cannot be shaken, and a legacy that cannot be erased. Because you led not from fear. You led not from the need to rule. You led from truth. And truth never begs for control. It simply leads. And when truth leads, the need for control dissolves because truth does not need anything. It simply is. It does not chase. It does not beg. It does not fear rejection or demand submission. It radiates. It holds. It reveals. And the man who carries that kind of truth within him, he is not just a leader. He is a force of nature cloaked in calm, a storm made of silence. A compass others aligned to, not because they were told to, but because their soul remembers the direction it had forgotten. He doesn't bark orders. He doesn't threaten. He doesn't manipulate outcomes behind closed doors. He just lives it. Every hour, every conversation, every moment of uncertainty met with unwavering clarity. He has no use for grand declarations because his energy does the talking. Because what he builds is not held together by control, it's held together by congruence. The way he loves, the way he disciplines, the way he walks through failure without collapsing into it. That's what people follow. Not his name, not his strength, but his consistency. Because in a world of shapeshifters and empty promises, the rarest man of all is the one who is the same when no one is watching. Who leads the same behind closed doors as he does in public? Who holds his integrity not like a trophy, but like a torch shown he's willing to carry alone if he must? He has made peace with solitude. He has made peace with being misunderstood, because he knows those who are addicted to control are always desperate to be understood. But the man of truth, he doesn't need to be understood. He simply needs to remain aligned, because from that alignment, everything else flows. Leadership without control is not weakness. It is the highest form of power. It is the power of restraint, the power of responsibility, the power of knowing you could dominate, you could impose, you could crush, but you choose to lead with presence instead. And presence is the final frontier. It is the space where all control ends and all influence begins. It is the invisible architecture of a kingdom built not on fear but on fire. So become the man whose presence leads the room. Become the man who commands not through force but through frequency. Become the man who is remembered not for how many followed him blindly, but for how many woke up in his presence and finally began to follow themselves. That is the mark of the modern man. He does not seek to control. He seeks to liberate. And liberation is messy. It doesn't arrive with applause. It doesn't look like perfection. It begins with destruction, the unraveling of everything false, everything fragile, everything fed to you by broken men who called it strength. To lead without control, you must first let go of the need to be perceived as powerful. You must walk naked into the fire of your own becoming, stripped of the armor that once kept you safe but now keeps you small. You must watch every illusion you built about success, about masculinity, about leadership collapse in your hands until all that's left is truth. And truth is never convenient. It is never easy, but it is unbreakable. And when you lead from it, you become indestructible, no, because harm won't come, but because no harm can shake what you did not build on illusion. The modern man understands this. He doesn't outsource his identity to applause or titles. He doesn't crave control over others because he's finally earned control over himself. Not the brittle control of repression, but the real control of radical ownership. He knows when to act and when not to, when to speak and when silence is louder, when to walk away, not out of pride but out of principle. And those who follow him feel it. They don't follow out of fear. They follow because they trust him, because he trusts himself, because he's done the work quietly, privately, relentlessly to become the man who no longer flinches in the mirror. That is leadership. Not noise, not fame, not followers, but self-possession. Not self-obsession, not ego, self-possession. The unshakable sovereignty of a man who belongs fully to his own values. A man who knows, if I lead from truth, I will lose things. I will lose popularity. I will lose the false relationships that depended on my compromise. I will lose the comfort of certainty. But what I gain is worth everything, because I will gain myself. And when a man has gained himself, he cannot be bought. He cannot be moved. He cannot be broken by systems built to enslave minds still clinging to control. He becomes the system. He becomes a reminder that the only thing more powerful than ruling others is ruling yourself. That the only thing more magnetic than control is command. Quiet, rooted, undeniable command. So remember this. The modern man does not fear the chaos. He orders it not with force, but with form. He doesn't dominate others. He disciplines himself. He doesn't need to lead from above because he walks ahead, torch in hand, aligned in soul, and without ever raising his voice, the whole world follows. So now the world waits, not for another king to conquer it, not for another man to control it, but for one who dares to lead without needing to. A man who leads not from hunger, but from wholeness. Not from fear, but from fire. A man who understands that the loudest voice is often the most uncertain, and that real power doesn't raise its voice. It raises the standard. The world is watching not your speeches, not your strategies, but your spine. Your silence when everyone else panics. Your stillness when the storm hits. Your refusal to break even when no one's watching. That's where leadership is reborn. So lead, not for applause, not for obedience. Lead, because the fire inside you won't let you do anything less. Lead because you've earned the right to walk with vision in a world drowning in noise. Lead because control is obsolete. But truth is eternal. And the man who leads without needing to control is the man the future will never forget.